Kody Brown once looked directly into a confessional camera and said, "And I want you to really hear this." He said, "I make it a point to be present for my children's milestones. That is non-negotiable for me." Non-negotiable. That was the word he chose. A man who built his entire public identity around the idea that plural family meant more love, more presence, more of everything a child could need, and he looked into that lens and said being there for his kids was something he simply did not compromise on. Ever. And then there is Truly Brown. If you are new here and this is the first video of mine you have ever clicked on, welcome! And I need you to hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what I am about to walk you through is the kind of deep dive that this channel was built for. This is not a recap. This is not a hot take. This is a documented, season-by-season, moment-by-moment examination of one little girl's childhood and what it actually looked like when the cameras were rolling, when they weren't, and when Christine Brown finally decided she had seen enough. Subscribe! You are going to want every video in this series. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what was lost, you have to understand what was there first. Truly Brown's earliest birthdays were, by every account and by the footage itself, exactly what a childhood birthday is supposed to be. Loud, chaotic, full of siblings running in from every direction, multiple mothers coordinating food and decorations, a house that felt like it was barely containing the energy inside it, and a father who was present. Engaged, big in the room the way Kody Brown could be when he chose to show up fully, arms out, voice loud, making the child feel like the center of the universe. That is what Truly was given first. That is the standard her nervous system was wired to expect. A little girl doesn't know she's being handed a baseline. She doesn't know that the warmth she's swimming in is going to become the thing she spends years quietly reaching for. She just knows that on her birthday, every person who loves her is in the same room, and her dad is there, and everything feels right. That's all she knows. And that is everything. Truly Brown's first birthdays were everything a childhood should be. Messy and loud and full of people who loved her. That little girl had no way of knowing those moments were the exception, not the rule. Sit with that for a second, because what happens next happens slowly. And slow is the cruelest way for something to happen to a child. Here's the thing about patterns in a long-running reality show that almost nobody talks about. You almost never see the shift while it's happening. Episode to episode, season to season, you're watching individual moments. A birthday here, a school event there, a dinner, a conversation, a family trip. Each one feels like its own contained thing. And if any single one of those moments is a little off, if Kody seems distracted, if he leaves early, if he's visibly somewhere else even when he's physically present, it's easy to write it off. Bad day, busy schedule, complicated logistics of managing 4 families. But when you step back, when you actually sit down and lay the full series timeline out like a map, the trajectory becomes impossible to ignore. The birthday celebrations for the Brown children became, across the documented seasons, increasingly segregated by maternal households. As Kody's attention fractured, and the show captured this in real time, whether it intended to or not, the shared whole family celebrations gave way to smaller, quieter gatherings. And for Christine's children specifically, and for Truly most visibly, the documented presence of Kody at those celebrations began to shrink. Not dramatically, not in a single season where you could point and say, there, that's the moment it changed. It was gradual in the way that erosion is gradual. Nobody notices a riverbank disappearing 1 grain of sand at a time, but come back after 10 years and the landscape is unrecognizable. Nobody notices a father disappearing from birthdays 1 percentage point at a time, but when you lay the seasons side by side, the empty chair gets louder every year. And the dedicated viewers of this show, and I know many of you watching this right now, are exactly that. You noticed. Maybe not consciously, not in a way you could have articulated mid-season, but something was registering. Something kept pulling your attention back to the edges of the frame, to the background of the birthday scenes, to the question that nobody on the show was directly asking. Where is Kody? And how long has he been standing that far back? Now, I want to talk about something that I think is one of the most under-examined dynamics in the entire run of Sister Wives. And that is the difference between what was captured on camera and what those captured moments were actually made of. When Kody showed up for Truly's birthdays when he was there, present, in the footage, those moments were filmed. They were used. They became part of the constructed narrative of a father who, Whatever his complications and contradictions, showed up for his children. The appearance of a present father was real within the window that the cameras were running, and within that window, it looked fine. It looked like enough. But here's what the footage cannot capture, and what no confessional can manufacture. What happened on the birthdays the cameras were not rolling for? What truly experienced in the ordinary years, the between-seasons years, the years where TLC wasn't there to create the structural incentive for performance. Because when you remove the camera when there is no footage to produce, no narrative to serve, no audience whose perception needs to be managed, what remains is the truest version of a person's choices. And Truly Brown was always there on those days. The cameras were not always there. Truly always was. Kody Brown showed up for Truly's birthdays when the cameras were there. The cameras weren't always there. Truly always was. That is not an accusation built from speculation. That is a logical consequence of everything Christine Brown has shared in her own words and interviews, in her memoir, in the unguarded moments of her post-divorce public presence, where she stopped managing the narrative and started simply telling the truth about what her marriage looked and felt like from the inside. And that brings me to Christine, because you cannot tell Truly's story without telling Christine's story. And you cannot tell Christine's story without understanding that her decision to leave was not built on a single dramatic collapse. It was built on accumulation. Years and years of small, quiet, undramatic moments that landed in her body like stones. Each one manageable on its own, each one adding weight she was pretending not to feel. The birthday angle is specific, and it matters. There is strong evidence from Christine's own accounts that during the COVID period, when the Brown family's fractures became impossible to paper over, Kody's failure to prioritize Truly celebrations was one of the moments that Christine herself describes as clarifying. Not explosive, not the kind of thing that makes for dramatic television, just clarifying. Because here is what that period revealed in a way that normal life allows you to blur. Kody was in the same city. He was not traveling, he was not managing a crisis elsewhere. He was physically present in the Las Vegas area, and he was choosing, consistently and deliberately, to remain in Robyn's home. And Truly's birthday came, and it went. And the man who had said on camera that his children's milestones were non-negotiable was 5 miles away by choice. Christine Brown didn't leave Kody because of one enormous betrayal. She left because she watched her daughter's birthday come and go one too many times and realized the man who should have been there was 5 miles away by choice. When you hear Christine talk about that period now, with the clarity that comes from being on the other side of a decision you should have made years earlier, there is a specific quality to the way she describes those moments. It is not anger exactly. It is something quieter and more devastating than anger. It is the tone of a woman describing the moment she finally stopped explaining away the evidence in front of her and simply looked at it. And what she saw was her daughter, on her daughter's birthday, in a house where the father was not. Now, I want to tell you something that I genuinely believe has never been examined with the weight it deserves in any coverage of this family. And it starts with a name. Christine named her youngest daughter Truly. Think about that choice for a moment. Not as a quirky, plural family naming convention, not as a fun piece of celebrity baby name trivia, but as an intention. Christine Brown, a woman who has always worn her emotions close to the surface, who has always led with her heart in a way that the show sometimes treated as weakness, and that I would argue was always her greatest strength. Christine chose that name as a statement. Truly, as in genuinely, as in without performance or pretense. As in the real thing, the actual thing, the thing that is exactly what it presents itself to be. She named her daughter after the quality of love she was committing to give her, and then she spent years watching that name become the most painful irony in her marriage, because the one thing Truly Brown did not consistently receive from her father was anything true. What she received was scheduling. What she received was logistics. What she received were the TLC-ready appearances, the camera-present performances, the version of fatherhood that existed inside the production window and dissolved when the window closed. She did not receive the trueness her name demanded. Christine named her daughter Truly as a statement of genuine, unperformed love. And then she watched that name become the most heartbreaking irony in her marriage, because the one thing Truly Brown never consistently got from her father was anything true. I have thought about that a lot. I keep coming back to it, because there is something in that naming something in Christine's choice of that specific word for this specific child that feels like it contains the entire emotional architecture of everything that came after. Christine believed in the true version of things. She believed in the actual, unperformed, consistent reality of love as a daily practice. She named her daughter after that belief, and she spent her marriage learning, slowly and at enormous personal cost, that the man she had built that marriage with did not share it. And that brings us to what birthdays actually are, what they mean at the cellular level of a child's experience, and why the pattern of Kody's absence during them carries the specific kind of weight that it does. A birthday is one of the few moments in a child's life that is entirely, structurally, by design about them. Not the family, not the marriage, not the logistics of who has to be where or which household is on which rotation. Just them. The child. The fact of their existence and the decision of the people who love them to stop everything and say, today, you are the point. Today, everything else is secondary to you. Every birthday that Kody underperformed on, every celebration where he was physically absent or emotionally elsewhere, or visibly managing his time between obligations, was a moment where the structure of the day itself delivered a message to Truly that he almost certainly intended, but absolutely sent. Even today, even on the one day that is yours, other things matter more. That message does not announce itself. It does not arrive in words, it arrives in the quality of someone's attention, in the duration of their presence, in the feeling a child gets when they look up during their birthday and search the room for their father's face and find it pointed somewhere else. And that message compounds. It becomes a belief, not a conscious belief, not the kind a child could articulate if you ask them, but a body-level, below-language understanding of where they rank, of what they can count on, of what love looks like when it's busy. Kody Brown has never publicly acknowledged what his inconsistency cost Truly on the days that were supposed to be entirely hers. Until he does, every birthday she celebrates beautifully is both a triumph and an open wound. I want to talk about the fans for a moment, because there's a specific kind of viewer that a show like SisterWives produces over a long enough run, and that viewer is not the casual watcher who tunes in for the drama and tunes out when the season ends. I am talking about the kind of fan who has watched this show with the focused attention of someone who understands that the most important information in a reality series is almost never in the scenes the production wants you to pay attention to. It is in the background. It is on the edges. It is in the detail that nobody flagged it as significant, because at the moment, it didn't look like anything. Those viewers exist in enormous numbers in this audience, and I know that because I hear from them. And what those viewers have been saying quietly, consistently across forums and comment sections and fan communities for years is that the real emotional documentation of the Brown family's collapse is not in the dramatic confrontation scenes. It is not in the screaming matches, or the confessional breakdowns, or the moments where someone finally says out loud the thing they'd been holding for 3 seasons. Those moments are real, but they are the surface. They are the visible portion of something that was built slowly and invisibly underneath. The real documentation is in the birthday episodes, the school performances, the ordinary Tuesday dinners that happened to be filmed, the quiet moments where nothing dramatic was occurring and so nobody was performing for the drama of it. And in those moments, in the unscripted background of the ordinary, the truth about Kody Brown's relationship with each of his children was sitting there in plain sight for anyone who was paying close enough attention. And the dedicated viewers paid attention. They watched the birthday episodes, and they did something that I find genuinely remarkable. How long did Kody stay? Where was he positioned in the room? Who did he talk to, and for how long? And what was the quality of his engagement with each child when the child was the nominal reason for the gathering? Was he present in the way that presence means something? Or was he present in the way that a piece of furniture is present, technically occupying the space without contributing to the emotional temperature of it? For Christine's children, across the documented seasons, the data was not flattering. For Truly specifically, and the fans who tracked this most carefully will know exactly what I'm describing. It was heartbreaking, because Truly is the youngest. Truly is the one who had the least time with the version of her father who showed up fully. Truly is the one who grew up inside the fracture, rather than watching it happen from the outside the way her older siblings could. She didn't see the before and the after. She was born into the during, and the during is all she has ever known of him. The most dedicated Sister Wives fans didn't need the drama to tell them what was happening. They watched the birthday episodes and counted how long Kody stayed. The math told the whole story. And here's the thing about math. It doesn't lie in the way that people can lie. Kody Brown is, whatever else you want to say about him, a man who has always had an explanation. He has always had a framework. There has always been a reason, a context, a structural justification for why the thing that looks like absence is actually something more complicated than absence. He is extraordinarily fluent in the language of complexity, in the vocabulary of a man who needs you to understand that his situation is genuinely difficult in ways that your situation simply is not. But birthday math doesn't have a framework. It is just numbers. It is just, how long did you stay? And when you are the father of the child whose birthday it is, and the answer is consistently shorter than it should be, shorter than presence requires, shorter than the message you are supposedly trying to send, the complexity collapses. What remains is a choice. And what the choice reveals is a priority. And what the priority reveals, assembled across years of documented footage and Christine's own testimony, and the quiet evidence of a little girl's face in the background of the birthday scenes, is the truth that Kody Brown could not perform his way out of, no matter how many confessionals he was given to try. Now, I want to go somewhere that requires me to be careful, because I am not in the business of pretending to know things I do not know. I am in the business of looking at documented evidence and following it honestly to its logical destination. And the logical destination of everything I have laid out for you today takes me to something I want to name directly. There is a wound that Truly Brown is carrying that is specific to her, different in texture from the wounds her older siblings carry, and it is this. She does not have the same volume of memories of the before. Aspen and McKelty and Peyton and the older Brown children have years of footage, years of lived memory, years of a family that functioned in some genuinely meaningful way before the fractures became irreversible. Those memories exist. They are real. They complicate the grief, because the grief is for something that was actually there and is now gone. Truly's grief is for something she was promised and never fully received. That is a different kind of wound. It is the grief of a child who was shown the blueprint and then watched the building never get finished. It is quieter than the grief of loss, and in some ways, it is harder to process, because you cannot mourn what you never fully held. You can only carry the persistent, below-language ache of knowing that something was supposed to be there and wasn't, and not always having the words for why that ache exists or what it is for. Christine knows this. I believe, based on everything she has said publicly, based on the specific way she talks about her decision to leave, and what she was trying to give Truly by making it, I believe Christine made the choice she made, in part because she understood that staying would not give Truly the father she deserved. It would only extend the duration of the wound. And leaving as painful and costly and publicly complicated as leaving was, at least offered the possibility of something different. Not a replacement. You cannot replace a father. David Woolley is not Truly's father, and nobody with any sense is arguing that he is or should be. But what David Woolley can say is that the evidence of Christine's social media and the documented warmth of their family life increasingly suggests he is a consistent, present, genuinely engaged adult man who shows up. Not for the camera. Not for the TLC production window. Not for the version of fatherhood that looks right in footage and dissolves when the crew packs up. Just shows up. On ordinary days. On birthdays. On the days that were supposed to be entirely about Truly, and where the only thing a child actually needs from the adults in her life is the evidence of their presence. Christine Brown didn't just leave Kody for herself. She left to give Truly a chance to learn what consistent love actually looks like. In practice. Not in confessionals, not in promotional content, but in the daily, unfilmed, undramatic reality of a man who stays. And this is where I want to make a prediction. I do not make predictions lightly on this channel. When I say I believe something is coming, I say it because I have followed the documented arc of this family long enough to understand the trajectory. And the trajectory here is not ambiguous. Truly Brown's future birthdays. The ones we will see on Christine and David's social media. The ones that will not be produced by a network or shaped by a narrative agenda or framed to serve a plural family brand. Those birthdays are going to become something. They are going to become a quiet, recurring, publicly visible demonstration of what fatherhood actually looks like when it is chosen freely and practiced consistently, without a camera mandate and without a theological framework that requires the choosing to be performed in a specific way. David Woolley is going to be in those photos. He is going to be in the background and the foreground and the candid middle-of-the-moment frames that Christine posts because she is genuinely happy and genuinely wants to share it. And his presence in those images is his consistent, undramatic, unannounced presence at the celebrations of a little girl who spent years having her birthdays quietly underattended by the man whose name she carries, is going to say something that no statement, no interview, no dramatic confrontation scene ever could. It is going to say, this is what she deserved. This is what she was always supposed to have. This is what it looks like when someone decides that a child's birthday is, in fact, not negotiable. I predict that the most powerful thing Truly Brown will ever post on social media won't be a statement about her father. It will be a birthday photo with a man named David smiling in a way that makes every absence in her childhood visible by contrast. And I genuinely believe that when that image exists, when it is out there, visible, unambiguous, it will not require a caption. It will not require an explanation. It will just be a girl on her birthday, surrounded by people who chose to be there. And anyone who has followed this story will understand exactly what they are looking at. Now, I need to say something about Kody, because this channel has never been in the business of reducing complicated human beings to flat villains, and I am not going to start now. Kody Brown is not a monster. He is something more ordinary than a monster, and in some ways more difficult to reckon with. He is a man who convinced himself, over many years and with great elaborateness, that his choices were justified by the complexity of his circumstances. He is a man who built a theological and ideological structure around his life choices that made it extremely difficult for him to see those choices clearly, because the structure was always available to explain them away. He had a belief system that told him he was doing something important and spiritually significant. And when your belief system is doing that much load-bearing work, it becomes almost impossible to look down and see what is actually being built on. What was being built on what the belief system was sitting on top of was the daily experience of a set of children who needed a father, and received, with varying degrees of consistency and warmth and genuine engagement, something that functioned as a father when conditions were right, and dissolved when conditions became inconvenient. That is not evil. That is something sadder and more mundane than evil. That is a man who loved his children in the way he was capable of loving them, and whose capacity was not equal to the demand his choices had created. And the tragedy of that specific, unglamorous, undramatic tragedy is that the people who pay the price for a man's limited capacity are never the man himself. They are the children who needed more than his capacity allowed. Truly Brown did not choose to be born into a plural family. She did not choose the structure, the logistics, the rotating schedule, the competing obligations, the theological framework, or the TLC production deal. She was born into all of it. She was handed it as the baseline reality of her existence before she had the language to evaluate it. And what she needed, inside all of that complexity, was exactly what every child needs: the evidence, repeated and consistent and unperformed, that she mattered. That on her birthday, she was the point. She deserved that unconditionally. Not because she earned it, not because the logistics cooperated, not because the cameras were rolling or the family narrative required it, just because she was a child and it was her birthday, and the people who loved her were supposed to show up. Kody Brown loves his children. I believe that. I also believe that love without presence is a statement, not a practice. And Truly Brown deserved the practice. I want to close with something that I think about every time I sit down to make a video about this family. And it's this. The reason SisterWives matters is the reason this story has held an audience for over a decade. The reason people who have never lived anything close to a plural family structure find themselves genuinely invested in these people and these children is not the drama. It is not the confrontations or the theological debates or the real estate decisions or the husband's obvious and escalating favoritism. Those things are interesting, but they are not the reason. The reason is that underneath all of it, underneath the structure and the brand and the TLC packaging, there are children. Real children, growing up in real time on camera, accumulating the experiences and the wounds and the joys and the confusions that will form them into the adults they will eventually be. And we have watched that process. We have been present for it in an unusually intimate way. We have seen these kids on their birthdays and their first days of school, and their graduations and their weddings, and their own first children being born. We have watched them become. And Truly Brown, the youngest, the one who carries a name that means something, the one whose childhood spanned the full arc of her parents' marriage, from fragmentation to divorce to the genuine, documented, visibly real happiness her mother has found on the other side, Truly is the one whose story is still being written in real time. She is still becoming. And what she is becoming, against the odds of the childhood she was handed, is someone who gets to learn what she deserved all along. That matters. Not as content, not as a narrative beat in a YouTube video series. It matters because she is a real person, and her story is real, and the wound at the center of it is real. And the healing of the slow, unfilmed, undramatic, daily healing that happens inside a home where people show up consistently is real too. Truly Brown was named for the quality of love her mother promised her on the day she was born. She is finally, in the home her mother built on the other side of an enormous amount of courage, receiving it. And every birthday from here forward is proof. Tell me in the comments, what is the one moment from Sister Wives that made you realize Kody Brown was never going to be the father Truly needed? Because I think every longtime viewer has that moment. That one scene, that one line, that one episode where something shifted for you, and you looked at the screen and thought, he is not going to change. He does not see what we see. He is not going to be what she needs. Tell me yours. I read every comment on this channel. Every single one. If Truly Brown's story deserves to be told with this level of care, and I believe it does, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells YouTube that this kind of content is worth putting in front of people who haven't found this channel yet. And subscribe, because the next video in this series goes somewhere I have been building toward across every episode we have covered together. It connects threads that have been running in the background of this entire story. Threads about Robin, about the legal marriage, about the specific sequence of decisions that restructured this family in ways that are still not fully understood by even the most dedicated viewers. I have been sitting on this one for a while. It is the one that ties everything together. Subscribe so you are there when it drops. I will see you in the next one.